Hello, and thank you for launching this presentation entitled Addison and Steele New in memory of Alexander Waugh, Episode 2. My name's Eric Luskow, and today is March 1st, 2025. I'll be approaching this topic from an Oxfordian perspective, i.e. that Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, was the author of the works of William Shakespeare, historically attributed to William Shakespeare, the man from Stratford. If you're not familiar with the Shakespeare Authorship Question and the Oxfordian theory, I would highly recommend you visit the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship website, shakespeareoxfordfellowship.org, for an overview. I would also recommend you watch my video, Addison and Steele New in memory of Alexander Waugh, Episode 1, before watching this video. And I would also recommend you watch any of Alexander Waugh's videos on YouTube. They are extraordinary. So in episode 1, I explained the title of the series, briefly introduced Joseph Addison and Richard Steele to anyone who is not familiar with them, and also placed their publication, The Spectator, in the context of its era. Again, please watch episode 1 first. It will provide a better understanding of this video and ensuing videos in the series. So in episode 1, we looked at the Spectator edition dated Thursday, March 22nd, 1711, referred to as Essay 19, or in my edition, The Envious Man, signed with the letter R, and it generally agreed to have been written by Richard Steele. In this episode, we will look at the Spectator edition dated Friday, March 30th, 1711, Essay 26, or here in this edition, The Monuments of the Dead in Westminster Abbey, signed with the letter I, and generally agreed to have been written by Joseph Addison. The essay opens with a quote from Horace's Odes, Book 4, line 13. Now that's a grammatic reference. 4 plus 13 equals 17, which is one of Oxford's grammatic numbers, adopted by virtue of his being the 17th Earl of Oxford. I also underline fabulseque manes, forgive my pronunciation if it's incorrect, translated as legendary ghosts, which I'll return to shortly. So Addison begins a ramble through Westminster Abbey and offers up general musings appropriate to a burial site, but quickly slips into a digression on those who died at war with quotes from the Iliad and the Aeneid. These are not memorable lines, to say the least, the names of 3 dead Trojan soldiers. Perhaps Addison could have found something more profound, yet these apparently pedestrian quotes, I'll argue, serve his purpose quite well. On a surface level, he appears to be reflecting on the usual graveyard musings, brief or non-existent epitaphs, futile deaths, gravestones containing only the barest of information, names and dates of birth and death, but I believe there's a subtext related to the authorship question. And by the way, this screenshot is from a version of the first 50 Spectator essays edited by John Morrison, which includes the line location for the Iliad, but not for the Aeneid, and also includes an English translation. In the original, only the Greek and Latin lines with authorial attribution were there. The line from Homer is from Book 17, another grammatic flag, and additionally, the line is 216, so we can get another 17 by adding 1 plus 7 plus 2 plus 1 plus 6. But more significantly, the line from Homer is truncated. The Virgil line is complete, but in Homer there are actually 4 Trojans listed. The missing Trojan is named Mesthles, and I will struggle with that word, that name, repeatedly in this essay. Critically, Addison leaves Mesthles out, so here we have what I will argue is a subtle reference to the numbers 3 and 4, the Masonic ternary and quaternary, wherein the quaternary is hidden within the ternary. Additionally, the 3 dead soldiers are Trojans, which obviously begins with the letter T, and may be another reference to the Freemasonic triple tau, with the missing Mesthles as the hidden T that forms the quaternary from the ternary. When Aeneas meets the other 3 Trojan soldiers in the Aeneid, Virgil doesn't tell us what happened to Mesthles. So I will further argue that beyond the 3 and 4 Masonic numerology, Addison is hinting that someone is missing. Only if you know the Homeric line would you recognize that Mesli's has been left out and that his fate is unknown. As an aside, if you dislike gematria and or Freemasonry in your authorship question stew, you may ignore it at your own peril. And if you might think that this interpretation hangs on a gossamer thread, here is what follows. Since you're watching this video, I'm confident I don't need to explain that this is an allusion to Shakespeare. Here we have Addison citing lines from Homer and Virgil, then immediately following with a Shakespeare allusion, literally placing Shakespeare alongside Homer and Virgil. Addison writes, "The life of these men is finally described in Holy Writ by the path of an arrow, which is immediately closed up and lost." So the references from the Apocrypha, the Wisdom of Solomon, and I'll read the quote in this footnote from Morrison's edition. "Or like as when an arrow is shot at a mark, it parteth the air, which immediately cometh together again, so that a man cannot know where it went through." So this is clearly from Hamlet. The Apocrypha was part of the Geneva Bible and also part of the King James Bible until 1885. And this entire episode takes up a considerable amount of copy, and it's quite odd unless we understand Addison's exquisite and ulterior authorship messaging. And in case one Shakespeare arrow shot were not enough, Addison then gives us another. Our author happens upon a grave being dug and proceeds to paraphrase at length the famous speech by Hamlet from the gravedigger's scene. Maybe, just maybe, a moderately educated reader in 1711 might miss the arrow shot allusion, but this one is unmissable. Addison has also given us a premonition in the leading quote from Horace of legendary ghosts, as noted earlier. Hamlet is, after all, a ghost story. So he's repeatedly putting us in mind of Shakespeare while visiting Westminster Abbey. Remember, this is 1711. The Shakespeare Monument was not installed until 1740. Addison then heads directly to the poetical corner and delivers a remarkable statement. "I found there were poets who had no monuments, and monuments which had no poets." Is this a veiled reference to Oxford's unmarked reinterment site? I believe it is, considering Addison had just made 2 Shakespeare allusions in rapid fire while declining to name him outright. And by the way, Addison's 1694 verse work, An Account of the Greatest English Poets, fails to mention Shakespeare, a fact critics have had quite a difficult time explaining. For example, Morrison, the editor I mentioned above, attributes Addison ignoring Shakespeare to, quote-unquote, immaturity, which is, to my mind, a peculiar explanation. So following another digression, Addison delivers for this essay a final, poignant summary of the Oxford story. "When I look upon the tombs of the great, every motion of envy dies in me. When I read the epitaphs of the beautiful, every inordinate desire goes out. When I meet with the grief of parents upon a tombstone, my heart melts with compassion. When I see the tomb of the parents themselves, I consider the vanity of grieving for those whom we must quickly follow. When I see kings lying by those who deposed them, when I consider rival wits placed side by side, or the holy men that divided the world with their contests and disputes, I reflect with sorrow and astonishment on the little competitions, factions, and debates of mankind." I read this quite beautiful poetic reflection as references in order to Edward de Vere, Tombs of the Great, Every Motion of Envy. Note the Vere in every and the NV, which I covered in episode 1. The Epitaphs of the Beautiful, Anne Cecil's tomb in Westminster Abbey. The grief of parents upon a tombstone. Above, you could see that Anne and her mother are both entombed here, and there are plaques at the top and all along the bottom written by William Cecil, grieving upon the deaths of his wife and his daughter. And as I just said, Mildred Cecil is entombed here. And William Cecil has a a little miniature statue above the tomb, um, reflecting his prayers and griefs for his wife and daughter. And then finally, we've got Mary, Queen of Scots, and Elizabeth, the kings lying by those who deposed them. If you've been to Westminster Abbey, you know that they're both in, I think it's the Edward VII tomb, but they are nearby. And we saw in the first episode how the word envy has been used to connect Oxford and the authorial name Shakespeare, and also how he was referred to envy by particularly Gabriel Harvey. And we know Anne Cecil's there. William Cecil wrote the great epitaph for her. You can really tell it's William Cecil if you've ever read it. And we know that Elizabeth's role in the Oxford story should be extraordinarily well known by now if you're watching this video. And we know that Oxford played a critical role in Mary, Queen of Scots' trial. For rival wits, we know Spencer, Beaumont, and Fletcher are interred in Poet's Corner, or as Addison calls it, Poetical Corner. And as far as the holy men, well, there are more than enough of them in Westminster to go around. I don't think we need a slide for them. So to conclude, Addison has taken a more nuanced approach to the Shakespeare authorship secret, which is befitting the location he is authorially visiting for this reflection. Westminster Abbey contains the graves and funerary monuments of the people involved in this conflagration of personal, state, and literary history that continues 400 plus years on to challenge, confound, and haunt our collective consciousness. But before we end, here's a brief glance at a very curious essay. It's number 37, also by Addison, and it's entitled The Library of a Lady. Notwithstanding the sexist nature of the essay, please note the essay date is April 12th, Oxford's birthday, and the Latin quote includes the word Minervae, again, forgive my pronunciation, which means of Minerva, also known as Pallas Athena, the spear shaker. So in episode 3 of this series, we'll look at another Addison essay in which he addresses the authorship question. It is a tour de force of Addison's wit, subtlety, and genius, demonstrating, along with the essays covered in episodes 1 and 2, that Addison and Steele indeed knew Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford, wrote the works of Shakespeare history has attributed to the wrong man. We too should, quote, reflect with sorrow and astonishment on the little competitions, factions, and debates of mankind, end quote, especially this one. Thanks for watching this video, and please join me for episode 3 of Addison and Steele New in memory of Alexander Wall.